Welcome back to Notes of Curiosity, exploring ideas that matter. And today we're diving deep into The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, a book that has had a huge impact on me personally. And I'm joined by our expert today.
Hi, I'm Eve.
And we are so excited to be talking about this book that has captivated millions and stayed on the New York Times bestseller list for years. It's even influenced other popular books like Meeting the Unknown Self. But before we jump in, can we talk about the author for a bit? I mean, Tolle's personal journey is pretty fascinating.
Yeah, definitely. He was struggling for years with really intense anxiety and depression, and then at age 29, he had this really profound shift in consciousness, like a complete transformation. He describes feeling like he couldn't live with himself any longer, and then suddenly being drawn into a void, an emptiness so complete it felt like death. But he surrendered to it.
That's incredible. Sounds terrifying and liberating all at the same time.
Right. And that experience became the foundation for The Power of Now, where he basically distills what he learned from that really intense experience. It's all about how true peace and happiness are actually found in the present moment, not in the past or the future.
That's such a powerful idea.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, most of us are conditioned to dwell in our thoughts and get
Yeah,
caught up in, worries about the future or regrets about the past.
exactly. And Tolle says that the mind is a superb instrument if used rightly, used wrongly. However, it becomes very destructive. He says so much of our suffering comes from misusing our minds, from identifying with our thoughts and letting them run our lives.
Right. It's like we create this mental prison for ourselves.
Exactly. And that's where he introduces the concept of the ego. The ego is this false sense of self created by our minds. And he says, to the ego, the present moment hardly exists. Only past and future are considered important. It's constantly looking for validation and security in the outside world, which leads to a cycle of, craving and aversion, always chasing something or trying to avoid something.
It's like we're on this endless treadmill, always running, but never getting anywhere.
That's a perfect analogy. And that's where the power of the present moment comes in. Holy says that's the only place where life actually exists, the only place where we can find real peace and joy.
Okay, but how do we access this present moment? Our minds are so noisy, always pulling us away from the now.
Well, Tolle says the first step is to simply become aware of our thoughts. He writes, the beginning of freedom is the realization that you are not the thinker. Have you ever noticed how your mind can go into overdrive when you're trying to fall asleep?
Oh yeah, totally. It's like my to-do list for the next month suddenly becomes top priority at like midnight.
Exactly. That's the ego wanting to maintain control. So step one is just observing our thoughts without judging them. Don't try to stop them or fight them. Just notice them coming and going like clouds in the sky.
Right. It's like that watching the thinker concept.
Yes. It's about creating space between our awareness and that constant stream of thoughts. Try this. Close your eyes for a moment and just notice your breath. Feel the air moving in and out. As thoughts come up, just acknowledge them and gently redirect your attention back to your breath.
Wow. That's actually really calming. It's amazing how much stillness you can find just by focusing on the breath. But I have to be honest, sometimes the present moment feels kind of stressful or unhappy. How can just being present make me feel better when things are tough?
That's a great point. And Tolle addresses that directly. He says it's important to differentiate between our life situation, which is our external circumstances, and life itself. He asks, are you unhappy in this moment? Or are you unhappy because you are comparing this moment to some mental image of how it should be? Our life situation might be challenging, but being present in itself can't be unhappy because it's just a state of being.
So it's like we're confusing our circumstances with our being.
Exactly. He gives the example of being stuck in traffic. The situation might be frustrating, but we can choose to be aware of that frustration without letting it take over. Maybe we notice the tension in our chest or the thoughts swirling in our heads. By simply observing those sensations and thoughts, we create space between ourselves and the frustration.
So it's not about denying or suppressing our feelings, but becoming aware of them without getting lost in them.
Right. And that awareness is what empowers us to choose how we respond to the situation. Maybe we turn on some music, call a friend, or practice mindfulness. Instead of being a victim of our circumstances, we create a more peaceful space inside ourselves, regardless of what's happening around us.
This is really starting to click for me. It's about shifting our focus from trying to change our external situation to cultivating peace within. But what about those times when difficult emotions feel overwhelming? Tolle talks about the pain body, right? Like that accumulation of past pain that can resurface and take over our thoughts and feelings.
Yes, the pain body is a central concept in The Power of Now. It's like a shadow self, made up of all the unexpressed pain, trauma, and negativity we've accumulated. Tolle says, It has a life of its own.
Like a separate entity that can hijack our being.
Exactly. He even calls it a psychic parasite, and he encourages us to notice the subtle signs when it's getting activated. Have you ever noticed how your mind wants to complain about things or rehash old arguments or just dwell on negative thoughts?
Unfortunately, all the time.
That's the pain body trying to survive. It thrives on negativity, and it wants to drag us down with it.
So knowing that, how do we deal with the pain body? Fight it. Ignore it.
Tolle says the most effective way is to bring it into the light of awareness. He writes, "It is through acknowledgement that you dissolve the pain body." So instead of trying to suppress or deny it, he encourages us to observe it without judgment.
So we're acknowledging its presence, but not giving it power over us.
Exactly. For example, let's say you feel a wave of anger or resentment building inside you. Instead of pushing it away, just try to observe it. Notice where you feel it in your body, what thoughts come with it, and how it's affecting your energy.
It's like we're becoming scientists, studying the pain body with curiosity rather than fear.
I like that analogy. As we observe the pain body with awareness and without judging it, it loses its hold on us. It's like shining a light on a monster in the dark. Suddenly it's not so scary anymore.
Okay, so we're not trying to get rid of the pain body, but transform it by bringing it into our conscious awareness. And that brings us back to the powers being present, right?
Yeah.
Because the pain body thrives on the past and future, on those mental stories we replay in our heads.
Yes,
I know.
absolutely. Tolle emphasizes that the pain body can't survive in the milli. Now, when we're fully present, we're not giving it our energy and attention. We're cutting off its food supply.
So we have a choice in every moment to feed the pain body with negativity or starve it with presence. But what about those deep-seated fears that seem to control our lives? Fear of failure, rejection, the unknown toll links a lot of that to the ego, right?
He does. He says, fear seems to have many causes: loss, death, pain, failure, the future. But ultimately, at the root of it all is the ego's fear of death.
The fear of ceasing to exist.
Right, because the ego is a mental construct. It's an illusion, and deep down it knows that. So it clings to anything that makes it feel solid and permanent: possessions, relationships, achievements, beliefs.
So the ego is always trying to protect itself from this perceived threat of annihilation.
Exactly. And that creates a lot of anxiety and fear. It makes us cling to what's familiar, even if it's not good for us. It makes us resist change, even if it's necessary for growth.
But Tolle suggests there's another way, right? To move beyond fear and find true liberation.
Yes. He says the more you are identified with your mind, the more you suffer. True freedom comes from realizing that we are not our thoughts, our emotions, or even our bodies. We are the awareness behind all of those things, the consciousness that observes the mind, emotions, and body.
So it's about shifting our identification from the ego to our true nature, to this deeper dimension of being.
Precisely. And as we make that shift, the fear begins to dissolve. We're no longer identifying with this limited, separate self that's afraid of death and decay.
So it's about recognizing our true nature as something eternal, something that goes beyond limitations of form and time.
Yes. He writes, the present moment is inseparable from who you are. When we connect with the ego, now we connect with that timeless dimension of our being, and that's where fear loses its power.
That is powerful,
Mm.
but still feels a bit abstract. What are
Yeah.
some practical ways we can start to make that shift from the ego to our true nature? How do we access that deeper dimension of being?
Tolle suggests a few things. One is to cultivate presence in our everyday lives. He encourages us to pay full attention to whatever we're doing, whether it's washing the dishes, walking the dog, talking with a friend.
So it's about being mindful, even in those mundane moments, instead of letting our minds wander off into worries or regrets.
Exactly. He writes, give up defining yourself to yourself or to others. You won't die. You will come to life. And don't be concerned with how others define you. When they define you, they are limiting themselves, so it's their problem. Whenever you interact with people, don't be there primarily as a function or a role, but as the field of conscious presence. Instead of rushing through our day on autopilot, he says we should slow down and really savor each moment.
You know, this reminds me of something else Tolle talks about that I found fascinating, ending the illusion of time.
Ah, yes, that's a key idea. He doesn't mean literally stopping time, of course. What he's getting at is our psychological attachment to time. He makes a distinction between clock time, which is practical, and psychological time, which he says is the source of a lot of our suffering.
Because psychological time keeps us trapped in the past and future.
Exactly. It's that voice in our heads that's always rehashing old events or worrying about what might happen, and that prevents us from truly experiencing the present moment.
So ending the illusion of time means shifting our attention away from that mental chatter and focusing on the nod. But how do we do that? Escaping the tyranny of time seems impossible.
Tolle suggests a radical solution. He says, realize deeply that the present moment is all you ever have. So instead of dwelling in the past or future, he encourages us to bring our attention fully to the present experience.
But wouldn't that make it impossible to plan or learn from the past?
He's not suggesting we abandon time altogether, but rather change our relationship with it. He says we need to recognize that time is a mental construct, not an absolute reality.
Okay, so it's not about denying the existence of time, but changing how we relate to it.
Exactly. He uses the analogy of a movie screen. The movie is a sequence of images projected onto the screen, but the screen itself is unchanging, always present. He says, time is the horizontal dimension of life.
So the screen represents the timeless dimension of our being, and the movie represents the changing flow of thoughts, emotions, experiences that come and go.
I love that. That's a great way to put it. By connecting with that timeless dimension with the screen itself, we can find peace and stability that are independent of the ever-changing content of our lives.
That's a really powerful image. But I'm still struggling to grasp how ending the illusion of time can actually change my experience of life. What are the benefits? Will it make me happier, more productive?
Tolle argues that yes, it can have a profound impact on our well-being and effectiveness. He says when we're trapped in psychological time, we're constantly resisting the present moment. We're either dwelling in the past with regret or worrying about the future with anxiety, and that creates so much unnecessary suffering.
Like fighting against the current instead of flowing with it.
Exactly. But when we shift our relationship to time, we stop resisting the present moment. We surrender to the now, and that brings peace and ease.
Like finally letting go of the oars and allowing the river to carry us.
Yes. And as we stop resisting, we tap into a deeper source of energy and creativity. Because we're no longer wasting energy fighting the present moment. We're fully engaged with what is.
It makes sense. When we're fully present, we can access our full potential.
Exactly. And that affects every area of our lives. Our relationships become more fulfilling, our work becomes more inspired, and our overall well-being improves. Tolle writes, most people find it very difficult to be present in the now, fully accepting of what is. They want to be somewhere else, with someone else doing something else. They look forward to what is to come, or they dwell on what has happened. They rarely stop long enough to appreciate the beauty and the miracle of life in the present moment.
This is starting to make a lot of sense, but I have to ask, isn't there a danger of becoming too passive if we just surrender to the present moment? What about goals and plans for the future?
That's a common concern, and Tolle addresses it directly. He says surrendering to the present moment doesn't mean we become passive or inactive. In fact, it can lead to more effective action.
Because we're acting from a place of alignment with life rather than fear or resistance?
Exactly. He says, accept, then act. Whatever the present moment contains, accept it as if you had chosen it. Always work with it, not against it. When we're fully present, we can tap into our intuition and make decisions that are aligned with our true purpose.
So it's not about giving up on our goals and dreams, but approaching them from a more conscious and aligned place.
Precisely. He writes, give up waiting as a state of mind when you catch yourself slipping into waiting. Snap out of it. Come into the present moment. Just be and enjoy being. Instead of being driven by fear or anxiety, we're guided by a deeper sense of clarity and purpose.
Okay, so we're not just sitting around meditating all day. We're still engaged with the world, but approaching it from a more present and conscious perspective. But what about those inevitable practical challenges? Bills, deadlines, conflicts? How does being present help us with real-world problems?
That's a great question. And Tolle acknowledges that life is full of challenges, but he suggests that our problems often come from our resistance to the present moment, from our attachment to those mental stories we create.
You mean it's not the problem itself that causes suffering, but our thoughts and feelings about it?
Exactly. He says, most people are so completely identified with the voice in their head that they don't even recognize it as thoughts. They think it's who they are. He uses the analogy of a projector. The problem is like an image projected on the screen, but the screen itself is always present, always still.
So the screen represents our true nature, our awareness,
Yeah.
which isn't affected by the constant flow of problems and challenges.
Right. And by connecting with that awareness with the screen itself, we can access peace and stability that are independent of the problem.
Okay, so it's not about denying the problem, but changing our perspective so we're not totally consumed by it.
Right. He says the primary cause of unhappiness is never the situation but your thoughts about it. Instead of being a victim of our circumstances, we become empowered to respond from a place of clarity and presence.
This is really starting to click for me, but honestly, I'm still a bit skeptical. Can simply being present actually solve my problems? Do I need to take action?
Of course.
Mhm.
But Tolle says action that comes from presence is far more effective than action driven by fear or anxiety.
Because when we're present, we're not clouded by those negative emotions. We see things more clearly and make better choices.
Exactly. He writes, make it a habit to monitor your mental and emotional state through self-observation. Am I at ease at this moment? Is a question you can ask yourself frequently. Or you can ask, what's going on inside me at this moment? When we're fully present, we access our intuition and creativity. We can tap into the wisdom that's always available to us.
So being present doesn't mean we become passive. It just means we're approaching challenges in a more conscious and empowered way.
Precisely, and that can make all the difference in our ability to navigate those
This
challenges.
is making a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But I still have to ask, isn't this all just feel-good philosophy? Does it work in the real world?
Mhm.
I mean, I can't just meditate my way out of financial problems or a health crisis, can I?
That's a valid question. Tolle acknowledges that being present isn't a magic solution. It's not going to instantly erase all our problems. But he argues that it can dramatically change how we experience those
So
problems.
it's not about eliminating problems, but changing how we relate to them.
Exactly. He writes, whenever you are present, you break the identification with your mind and become aware of yourself as the formless I am. So instead of being consumed by fear, anxiety, and despair, we access a deeper sense of peace and acceptance.
So being present doesn't make the problem disappear, but it helps us stay grounded and centered in the middle of the storm. It prevents us from getting swept away by our negativity.
Exactly. He writes, the more consciousness you bring into your life, the more you will be able to break free from the mind's control. And that makes a huge difference in how we cope with life's challenges.
This is really resonating with me.
Huh.
But I'm still curious about how we cultivate this sense of presence. Are there specific practices we can do? Or does it just happen?
Tolle suggests a number of practices that can help us get better at being present. One of the simplest and most effective is to focus on our breath.
He talks a lot about the breath, doesn't he?
He does. He describes it as our anchor to the present moment. It's always there reminding us to come back to the now.
So just taking a few deep breaths can help us shift our attention away from our thoughts and connect with the present moment.
Exactly. He suggests making a habit of checking in with our breath throughout the day. Notice the feeling of the air flowing in and out, the rise and fall of our chest, the gentle expansion and contraction of our abdomen.
Like we're taking mini meditation breaks throughout the day.
Exactly. And as we do that, we start to create space between our thoughts. We begin to disidentify from that mental chatter and connect with the stillness that's always there.
I love that. It's so simple yet so powerful. But what about those times when it's hard to focus on the breath? When our minds are racing or we're feeling overwhelmed by emotions? Are there other practices that can help us be present in those moments?
Tolle suggests using our senses to ground ourselves in the present moment. He writes, focus your attention on the feeling inside your body, or bring in the sense perceptions, sight, hearing, touch, smell, taste. Become aware of the silent presence of each sense. So instead of getting lost in our thoughts, we can pay attention to what we see, hear, touch, smell, and taste.
So if I'm stressed or anxious, I can take a moment to notice the colors and shapes around me, the sounds of the birds outside, the feeling of the sun on my skin.
Exactly. By engaging our senses, we're shifting our attention away from the mental chatter and connecting with the present through our physical experience.
It's like we're bringing ourselves back to our bodies, to the here and now.
Right, and that can be very grounding and calming, especially when we're overwhelmed by thoughts and emotions.
This is making a lot of sense.
Hmm.
But I have to admit, I'm still a bit intimidated by the idea of ending the illusion of time. It seems like such a huge shift.
And it is a big shift, but Toll emphasizes it's a gradual process. It doesn't happen overnight. He says, in the enlightened state of consciousness, the distinction between past, present, and future dissolves because it is seen as a mental construct and no longer perceived as reality.
So it's about taking small steps, practicing presence in our everyday lives, and gradually changing how we relate to time.
Exactly. And as we do that, we start to experience the benefits. We become more peaceful, more joyful, more creative, and more effective in the world.
This has been such an incredible deep dive into the power of Balm. Now, so far, I'm already seeing how these teachings can apply to my life.
I'm so glad to hear that. And we're just getting started.
That's right. There's so much more to explore in this amazing book.
I'm excited to delve into some of the practical aspects of Tolle's teachings in the next part of our deep dive.
Me too. I'm particularly interested in learning more about his insights on relationships and how presence can change our interactions with others.
That's a great topic, and we'll definitely be covering it in detail.
I can't wait. Until then, I'm going to try to be more mindful of my breath and my senses, see if I can start chipping away at this illusion of time that's been running my life for so long.
That's a wonderful intention. And remember to be gentle with yourself. This is a journey, not a destination.
Thanks for the reminder. And thanks again for joining me on this deep dive, Eve.
It's my pleasure, Alex.
So we've covered a lot of ground here in this initial exploration of the power of now. But I have a feeling we've just scratched the surface.
You're absolutely right. We've laid the groundwork for understanding Tolle's core ideas about the ego, the pain body, and the power of the present moment.
And we touched on some practices he suggests for cultivating presence.
But there's still so much more to discover about how these principles can change our relationships, our work, our creativity, and our overall experience of life.
That's what I love about this book. It's not just abstract ideas. It's a guide to living a more fulfilling and joyful life.
Absolutely. And I'm looking forward to exploring those practical applications in more depth next time.
Me too. I can't wait to dive back in. Until then, maybe our listeners can try bringing some of these ideas into their own lives. Even small moments of presence can make a difference.
That's a great suggestion. Just notice your breath, really savor your next meal, or truly listen to a friend's story. You might be surprised at what you discover.
Thanks again for joining us on the Deep Dive. We'll be back soon with more from the Power of Now.
See you then.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're continuing our exploration of the power of now.
You know, when we left off, we were talking about how being present can help us deal with life's challenges. But Tolle says this also has big implications for our relationships.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Relationships can be such a source of both joy and frustration. How does the power of now apply to them?
Well, imagine you're having a conversation with your partner, but your mind is somewhere else thinking about your to-do list. Are you really present with them? Tully would say no. And that lack of presence creates a barrier.
Yeah, I've definitely been there. It's like I'm physically present but mentally checked out.
And Tully says that's a common problem in relationships. We get so caught up in our own thoughts and needs that we don't really see or hear the other person. He writes, "Can you be there for the other as the other is? Can you listen to his pain, his anger, his joy, without judging it, without wanting to change it, without wanting to give advice?"
So it's about bringing that same awareness to our interactions, really listening to understand instead of just waiting to respond.
Exactly. And that means letting go of our own agenda, our need to be right or to control the situation. It's about creating space for real intimacy and connection.
That makes sense. When I feel truly listened to, is like a weight is lifted off my shoulders.
Yeah.
But let's be real. Relationships aren't always easy. What about when there's conflict? Does Tolle say we should just ignore problems and pretend everything's fine?
Not at all. He acknowledges that conflict is unavoidable in any relationship, but he suggests a completely different way of approaching it.
Okay, I'm listening.
Instead of seeing it as a battle that someone has to win, he encourages us to see it as a chance for growth and understanding. He writes, "The relationship then becomes your sadhana, your spiritual practice."
So we use those challenges as opportunities to learn and evolve. I can see how that would be way more constructive than just avoiding conflict.
Right. He says conflict is inseparable from egoic consciousness. And he really emphasizes taking responsibility for our own thoughts, feelings, and actions, instead of blaming our partner for our unhappiness.
This makes me think about those recurring arguments that couples have. The same fight over and over again.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Tully would say those patterns are usually coming from our unconsciousness, from that pain body we talked about.
Like we're bringing our baggage from the past into the present moment.
Exactly. And that baggage creates so much negativity and conflict in the relationship. Tully says one of the greatest gifts we can give our partner is our presence.
So by being fully present, we're not bringing all that past pain into the interaction.
Right, we're meeting them now with openness and acceptance. He says, love is a state of being. Your love is not outside. It is deep within you. You can never lose it, and it cannot leave you. It is not dependent on some other body, some external form.
I love that.
Yeah.
It shifts the focus from trying to get love from someone else to recognizing the love that already exists within us.
Exactly. And as we cultivate that love and presence inside ourselves, our relationships naturally start to change.
Like radiating that love and presence outward, creating a ripple effect.
Precisely. And Tolle says this applies to all relationships, not just romantic ones. Family, friends, coworkers, even strangers we meet.
So it's about bringing that same awareness to every interaction.
Right. He writes, giving up your egoic consciousness is the only true forgiveness. As long as you make yourself right and others wrong, as long as you attack or defend, as long as you see yourself as a victim, you are feeding the ego. He says even a smile or a kind word can have a huge impact.
This is really making me think about how I can be more present in my own relationships.
Yeah.
But what about work? I mean, many of our listeners are probably dealing with stress, burnout, and feeling unfulfilled in their jobs. Can Tolle's teachings help with that too?
Absolutely. Tolle says our work can be a path for spiritual growth if we approach it with presence. He writes, to bring the sacred into the mundane is an essential aspect of enlightenment.
So instead of seeing work as a chore, we can see it as a chance to practice presence and bring more consciousness into our day.
Exactly. He says, are you an employee or self-employed, a business owner or a manager? Do you dislike your job? Is there an element of fear underlying your motivation to work? Or are you free of fear, doing what you love to do and realizing your full potential as a human being? He encourages us to give our full attention to whatever we're doing, whether it's writing a report, leading a meeting, or just answering emails.
So the same idea of mindfulness, but applied to our work life.
Right. And he says even those boring tasks can become opportunities for spiritual growth if we do them with awareness.
So it's not about loving our jobs necessarily, but about changing our relationship to work.
Exactly. He writes, being present means you are fully conscious of what you are doing while you are doing it. Even if we don't love our work, he says we can still find peace and fulfillment in the present moment.
That makes me think about all the times I've been so stressed about work that I completely missed the present moment. So focused on some future outcome that I couldn't enjoy the process.
It's easy to fall into that trap. We get fixated on the destination and forget to enjoy the journey. But Tolle reminds us that the journey is all we really have.
So how do we actually bring more presence into our work? Are there specific things we can do, or is it just a mindset shift?
It's a bit of both. It starts with being aware of our thoughts and emotions. He says to notice when we're getting caught up in stress, worry, or frustration.
Like watching the thinker, but at work.
Exactly. And once we're more aware of our thoughts and feelings, we can make different choices. We can choose to step back, take a few deep breaths, connect with our bodies, and come back to the present moment. He writes, the present moment is all you ever have. Make the now the primary focus of your life.
So it's about cultivating that same awareness in the context of our work.
Right. And when we do that, we start to see the benefits. We become more focused, more productive, more creative, and more resilient when things get tough.
It's like we're tapping into this deeper energy and inspiration.
Exactly. And our work becomes more aligned with our true purpose. It's not just a means to an end anymore, but a way to express our creativity and contribute to the world.
Okay, we've talked about relationships and work. What about creativity? Does Tolle say anything about that?
He does. He says true creativity comes from a state of presence. He writes, you are the space in which it happens.
So it's about getting out of our own way, quieting the mind, and letting that creative energy flow.
Exactly. He says, the single most vital step on your journey toward enlightenment is this. Learn to disidentify from your mind. Every time you create a gap in the stream of mind, the light of your consciousness grows stronger. When we're stuck in our thoughts and doubts and fears, we block that flow. But when we're present, we create space for inspiration.
That's so true. When I try to source an idea, it never works. But when I relax and let go, the ideas come more easily.
Exactly. And Tolle says this is true for all kinds of creativity, writing, painting, dancing, music, even coming up with new ideas at work.
So it's about approaching the creative process with awareness.
Right. He writes, the moment you become aware of the ego in you, it is strictly speaking no longer the ego, but only a conditioned mind pattern. Ego implies unawareness. Awareness and ego cannot coexist. Instead of trying to control the outcome, he encourages us to be present with the process.
So let go of attachment to the results and just enjoy creating.
Exactly. He writes, creativity is not something that happens at some future point in time once you have attained a certain level of enlightenment or spiritual realization. You can access the creative dimension now. He says real creativity comes from joy, from that sense of connection to something bigger than ourselves.
This is really inspiring. It makes me think about how I can bring more presence and joy into my creative life. But what about when we feel stuck? When the inspiration just isn't there? What does Tolle say about overcoming creative blocks?
He says they often come from our fear of failure, our need to control, or our attachment to being perfect. He writes, if you look closely, you will find that most of your thoughts are not original. You think that you are your mind. That is the delusion. The instrument has been taken over.
So those same ego patterns show up in creativity too.
Exactly. And he says we need to challenge those patterns. Let go of perfectionism and embrace the unknown.
Be willing to make mistakes, experiment, play.
Right. He writes, realize deeply that the present moment is all you ever have. Make the now the primary focus of your life. He suggests that our most creative breakthroughs often come from those unexpected detours. when we're willing to step outside our comfort zone and embrace the unknown.
I can definitely relate to that. My best ideas have come when I let go of my expectations and allowed myself to be surprised. But what about those deeper layers of unconsciousness we talked about? The pain body and all that past pain and trauma, can that block our creativity too?
Absolutely. Tolle says the pain body can be a huge obstacle to creative expression. He writes, make it a habit to monitor your mental and emotional state through self-observation. Am I at ease at this moment? Is a question you can ask yourself frequently, or you can ask, what's going on inside me at this moment?
Because when the pain body's activated, we're not truly present. We're caught in those old patterns of negativity.
Exactly. And that negativity can stifle our creativity, make us doubt ourselves, and prevent us from expressing our unique gifts.
So how do we overcome that?
It starts with being aware of it. He encourages us to notice when the pain body is activated, observe its patterns without judgment, and bring it into our conscious awareness.
So it's the same process of becoming aware of those unconscious patterns.
Exactly. And as we do that, the pain body's grip loosens. We're not controlled by those old patterns anymore.
And that opens up space for our creativity to flow more freely.
Precisely. He writes, the greatest achievement of humanity is not its works of art, science, or technology, but the recognition of its own dysfunction, its own madness. As we heal our pain body, he says, we not only free ourselves from suffering, but also unleash our creative potential.
That's really powerful. It makes me think about all the ways I've let my pain body hold me back. But now I'm feeling more empowered to challenge those patterns and create a more fulfilling and creative life. What about enlightenment, though? That elusive state that so many spiritual seekers are after. Does Tolle believe we can achieve it?
That's a great question. And Tolle's view on enlightenment is a little different from traditional teachings. He says it's not a goal we achieve in the future, but a state of being that's available to us now.
So it's not about reaching some higher level of consciousness, but recognizing the enlightenment that's already within us.
Exactly. He writes, enlightenment is a state of harmony between you and the totality. He says enlightenment is simply waking up to the present moment, to the truth of who we really are.
So it's not about becoming someone else, but recognizing the extraordinary nature of the ordinary.
Precisely. He writes, you can only lose something that you have, but you cannot lose anything that you are. Enlightenment isn't something we acquire, but something we uncover.
Like peeling away layers of conditioning beliefs, fears, and attachments that have been obscuring our true nature.
Exactly. He writes, to the ego, the present moment hardly exists. Only past and future are considered important. This total reversal of the truth accounts for the ego's insane preoccupation with keeping itself in the virtual reality of the past and future, and in the continuous search for salvation or fulfillment in external things and in mind-made concepts and images, which are all projections of the mind. And as we do that, we start to experience the peace, joy, and freedom that are our birthright.
This is so inspiring. It makes me think about all the ways I've been searching for happiness in the wrong places outside of myself in the future. But Tolle says true happiness is available right here, right now, if we can just be present.
That's the heart of his message. He writes, realize deeply that the present moment is all you ever have. Make the now the primary focus of your life. He's telling us to stop chasing shadows and embrace the light that's already shining inside us.
It's a powerful message, but honestly, it's a little overwhelming. It's like he's challenging our entire way of thinking and being in the world.
He is, but he's not saying we need to become monks or hermits. He's just inviting us to bring more consciousness into our everyday lives, to wake up to who we really are.
So it's about integrating these principles into our daily routines, our relationships, our work, our creative endeavors.
Exactly. He writes, love, joy, and peace cannot flourish until you have freed yourself from mind dominance. It's about making small changes in our perspective, practicing presence in the little things, and gradually aligning ourselves with the flow of life.
This is really inspiring. It makes me think about all the ways I've been depriving myself of joy by focusing on the negative dwelling in the past and worrying about the future.
That's something a lot of us do. But Tolle's message is about hope and empowerment. He's reminding us that we have the power to choose joy, to choose presence, to choose enlightenment.
That's powerful.
It's about making small changes in our perspective, practicing presence in the little things, and gradually aligning ourselves with the flow of life.
This is really inspiring.
Yeah.
But what about people who are going through really difficult times? People facing illness, loss, or trauma? Can the power of now help them too?
That's such an important question, and Tolle acknowledges that life can be really hard. He doesn't pretend that pain and suffering don't exist. But he also says that even in those difficult times, we can find a deeper sense of peace and acceptance.
So it's not about denying the pain or pretending everything is okay.
Not at all. He writes, whenever you deeply accept this moment as it is, no matter what form it takes, you are at peace. He encourages us to embrace the present moment with all its ups and downs as a way to connect with the deeper dimension of being.
Like surrendering to life, trusting that even in the dark times, there's a deeper intelligence at work.
Exactly. And he says this surrender can actually be a source of strength and resilience.
This is really making me rethink my whole approach to life. But I have to admit, it's a little scary to let go of control, to surrender to the unknown.
I understand. It's a big leap of faith. But Tolle says that when we let go of our need to control, we open ourselves up to a much greater power, a power that can guide and support us in ways we can't even imagine.
That's so inspiring. It's
Yeah.
making me feel more hopeful, more
Mhm.
empowered, and more excited about what's possible. But is it realistic to live in a state of constant presence? I mean, we're human. We get distracted. We forget. We fall back into old habits.
Of course, Tolle knows that the mind is powerful and it's always trying to pull us back into its old ways. He writes, the ego says, I shouldn't have made that mistake and I will be very careful not to make it again in the future. Forgiveness implies that something wrong has happened, something that shouldn't have happened.
So it's not about being perfectly present all the time, but about noticing when we've lost presence and gently bringing ourselves back to the yield.
Exactly. He writes, the past has no power over the present moment. Every time we notice our minds wandering, it's a chance to practice coming back to the present.
Like a muscle we strengthen with each rep.
Precisely. And as we do that, we slowly develop a more stable sense of presence. He writes, realize deeply that the present moment is all you ever have. Make the now the primary focus of your life.
This has been such an insightful exploration of Tolle's teachings. I'm feeling so inspired to bring more presence into my own life. But before we wrap up, I have one more question. Tolle talks about finding our purpose, our true calling. How does that fit into everything else?
That's a great question. And Tolle's idea of purpose is a little different. He says our true purpose isn't about a specific career path or some grand mission. It's simply about being present, about waking up to who we really are.
So it's not about doing something extraordinary, but being extraordinary in the ordinary.
Exactly. He writes, boredom, anger, sadness, or fear are not yours, not personal. They are conditions of the human mind. They come and go. As we cultivate presence, we naturally align with our true purpose.
It's like our purpose reveals itself as we become more present.
Right. He writes, love is not selective, just as the light of the sun is not selective. It does not make one person special. It shines on everyone equally. Enlightenment is the simple but profound realization of what you are. The timeless, formless one life underneath all the forms of life. He says our purpose is to express our unique gifts, share our love with the world, and contribute to the evolution of consciousness.
This is really inspiring. It gives me a whole new perspective on living a purposeful life. But I have to admit, I'm still not sure how to actually find my purpose. Do I need to meditate for hours, quit my job, and travel the world, become a spiritual teacher?
Tolle wouldn't give a specific answer. He says the journey to finding our purpose is different for everyone.
So it's not about following a formula, but listening to our inner guidance and trusting the process.
Exactly. He writes, don't pollute your mind with resistance to what is. He encourages us to be open to new experiences, follow our passions, and trust that we're being guided in the right direction.
That makes me think about my own life, the choices I've made and where I'm headed. I'm feeling inspired to step back, listen to my intuition, and see where it leads me. Before we finish this part of our deep dive, what's one key takeaway you hope our listeners will remember about purpose?
I think the most important thing is that our purpose isn't something we find out there. It's something we embody. It's about aligning with the present moment, with the truth of who we are. And as we do that, our purpose unfolds naturally.
That's beautiful. Our purpose isn't a destination, but a journey, a way of being.
Exactly. And it's a journey that's available to all of us right here, right now. We just have to take that first step into the now.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We're wrapping up our exploration of Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now. You know, we've talked about so much, the ego, the pain-body presence, relationships, even work. But there's also this almost mystical side to the book that I'm really curious to explore.
Yes, Tolle definitely goes into some deeper, more spiritual aspects in his teachings. Like he introduces this idea of the inner body, which I think connects the practical and the profound.
Okay, the inner body. So what exactly is that? Is it just another way of talking about our physical body?
Not exactly. Think of it more like a deeper dimension of your physical self. It's not something you can see or touch, but it is something you can feel. Tolle describes it as a kind of field of energy or vibrant life that's within your physical form. He writes, the body that you can see and touch is only a small segment of the totality of your body, which is the inner body.
So it's an energy field that's connected to our physical body, but not limited by it.
Exactly. And he says that when we become aware of our inner body, we can tap into a much deeper sense of peace, stillness, and even joy.
More peace and joy I'm in.
Mhm.
How do we connect with this inner body?
It's actually pretty simple. Tolle suggests just sitting or lying down, comfortably closing your eyes, and simply paying attention to the sensations inside your body. It could be the feeling of your breath, the warmth in your hands, a tingling in your feet.
So we shift our focus from all those thoughts to our physical sensations.
Exactly. He writes, if you are not fully present in what you do, if your mind is elsewhere, you are not only denying yourself the fullness of life, but are also creating negative karma for yourself. He says that most of us are so caught up in our minds that we've lost that connection to our bodies.
I can relate to that. I spend so much time up in my head thinking, planning, and worrying that I forget to just be present in my body.
And that's where this practice of connecting with the inner body comes in. It brings us back to the present moment, helps us feel more alive and more connected to who we are. He says the pain body, which is the dark shadow cast by the ego, is actually afraid of the light of your consciousness.
Okay, I'm definitely going to try that. But I have to ask, what's the point? How does being aware of our inner body actually help us?
Well, Tolle says that the inner body is like a gateway to the unmanifested, which is what he calls that realm of pure consciousness.
Now, this is where it gets really mystical. What exactly is the unmanifested?
It's kind of hard to put into words, but he describes it as the source of everything, the ground of being, the timeless essence that everything comes from and goes back to. He writes, the dimension of the timeless is right here.
So it's like the ultimate reality, the truth behind all the forms and appearances of the world.
Exactly. And he says we can't really understand it with our minds. We can only experience it directly through being present, through that deep sense of stillness and being.
Okay, so I'm starting to see how the inner body fits in. It's like a bridge between our physical world and this realm of pure consciousness.
That's a great way to put it. He says the body that you can see and touch is only a small segment of the totality of your body, which is the inner body. When we become aware of our inner body, we create this space inside where the unmanifested can emerge.
Wow, this is pretty mind-blowing, but also super exciting.
Ah.
So if we can connect with the unmanifested through presence, does that mean we can reach enlightenment?
That's a great question. And as we've talked about before, Tolle has a unique view on enlightenment. He says it's not something you achieve in the future, but something you awaken to in the present moment. He writes, do you realize that only in the present moment can you be truly happy? The only place, the only time in which true joy, true love, true peace are available is now.
So enlightenment is not about changing who we are, but about realizing who we already are.
Yes. It's about realizing that we are not separate from the unmanifested, from that pure consciousness. We are it.
That is profound.
Mm.
But I have to say, it's still a bit hard to grasp. What does it actually look like to live in a state of enlightenment? How would our lives be different?
Tolle says that in an enlightened state, we're no longer identified with our thoughts, emotions, or even our bodies. We become the awareness that observes all those things.
Like we're taking a step back from all the drama in our lives and seeing it from a different perspective.
Exactly. He writes, the mind is a superb instrument, if used rightly. Used wrongly, however, it becomes very destructive. And he says that when we shift our perspective, like that we experience this incredible peace, freedom, and joy.
It's like finally being free from that inner critic, the ego.
Exactly. And then our actions start to flow with life. We're no longer driven by fear, need, or desire. We're just responding to each moment with wisdom and compassion.
That's amazing. It really makes you think about life in a whole new way. But is it really possible to reach that state of enlightenment while still living in the world with all its distractions and challenges?
That's a question we all face, and Tolle is honest. He says it's not easy to stay in that enlightened state all the time. He writes, the past has no power over the present moment. Our minds are always trying to pull us back into old habits.
So it's a continuous practice, like this journey of awakening that happens throughout our lives.
Exactly. He says the good news is that you can free yourself from your mind. This is the only true liberation. You can take the first step right now. He says to be patient with ourselves, celebrate the small wins, and just gently bring ourselves back to the present moment when we notice we've drifted away.
Eve, this has been such an amazing deep dive into the power of now.
Yeah.
I feel like I have a whole new understanding of what it means to live a truly fulfilling life. Before we wrap up, what's one key message you hope our listeners will take away from this?
I think the most important thing is that we all have the power to change our lives right here, right now. It's not about reaching enlightenment sometime in the future, but about waking up to who we truly are in this moment.
That's beautifully said. It's a reminder that enlightenment is not something we have to search for, but something we uncover, something that's already within us.
Exactly. And it starts with a willingness to shift our perspective, to let go of old patterns, and to embrace this present moment with all its ups and downs.
Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insights with us, Eve. It's been an honor to explore the power of now with you.
It's been my pleasure, Alex.
And to our listeners, we encourage you to get a copy of The Power of Now and explore these ideas for yourselves.
You might be amazed by how transformative it can be to simply be present.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, may you find peace, joy, and enlightenment in the now.